Thank you, Mr. President. Can you hear me? Hopefully you can. We'll see how good the technology is between London and Kenya. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person for your esteemed event, but obviously in these uncertain times, it's quite difficult for all of us to travel. I'm going to give you a brief presentation in relation to IVSC and IVS, who we are, what the links are to ISK, and then we will go on to launch the standards, which I'm very impressed with the level of progress that has been made in relation to these. So let's see whether I can work the technology or not. And I will just look to share presentation. Right. Okay. Good. So hopefully you can all see the presentation that is being shared with you. So why do we need consistency and standards? When I think about standards and consistency, actually, and I think about what is the most prevalent standard that there is in the world, for me, it's actually football, because when there's a World Cup, every team in the world participates in that, whether it's in qualifying or whether it's getting through to the final of the World Cup. And we all know what the rules are. We know when the players are onside, offside. We know when they're winning because of the goals that they score. And when we think about standards and consistency from a professional point of view, from an investor's point of view, if you're an international investor, do you really want to have to understand 195 different approaches to valuation? Not really. In the same way that from a football point of view, it would be meaningless if we had 195 different approaches to the rules of playing football. No one would understand it. You'd have no comparability as to which the best team is. In the same way that investors need to have that confidence and the comparability country by country. Unfortunately for me, I live in a country which is good at inventing games like football and then lets the rest of the world win at them. And my local team wasn't any better when I was growing up. It was called Newcastle United, although I used to think it was called Newcastle United 0, because every time I heard them on the radio or TV, it would always say Manchester United 5, Newcastle United 0. And so I went through my childhood like that. The only way they could win anything was actually to get relegated to a lower division and then win that division on the way up. But enough about football. So what is the IVSC? So we are the global body that's responsible for developing and setting international valuation standards. In simple terms, we would like to see international valuation standards in place across all asset classes and used everywhere in the world. So pretty simple ambition, easy to say, slightly more difficult to influence. We're also very strong believers in professionalism, because actually we can bring together professionals to put together the international valuation standards. But unless you have good professionalism on the ground in each country, the standards are meaningless. So the importance of that partnership with professional organizations such as ISK cannot be underestimated. We're independent and not-for-profit. We split the world very crudely into 3 areas. We have a tangible assets board, we have a business valuation board, and we have a financial instruments board. And we believe very much in a collaborative approach. So we work very closely with other stakeholders. There's shared interest in certain topics with IASB, from an accounting point of view, from FASB, the IAASB, as well as IOSCO, IFAC, World Bank. When we look at the World Bank and the UN and the IMF, they have all recommended in certain parts of the world that IVS be used. We believe very much in working in partnership with these other organisations to build trust in valuation and help develop the global financial system in the public interest. On some of our working groups, we have representatives from ISK and FASB. There's a joint valuation working group with IOSCO, which started this year, which is quite important because IOSCO brings together the key securities regulators from around the world. And so they're increasingly recognising the importance of valuation to that system. And for us, it's really important the regulators have confidence both in the international approach to valuation, as well as what professional bodies such as ISK and professionally qualified members such as yourselves are doing. I'm going to play a short video, if technology permits. This will be an interesting experiment. Briefly before that, we are formed of over 170 member organisations from across the world. There are over 70 professional organisations that qualify over 340,000 professionals. And we know that IVS is applied in 103 countries. So that's just a very brief video which we put together to highlight the importance of valuation from our perspective. So as I said earlier, we focus on the entire valuation profession. So we have boards on tangible assets, intangible and business valuation and financial instruments. And we believe that it's important that all of these areas are covered, but that they warrant sufficient specialism to have individual boards for those different areas. And obviously there is some crossover between some of these different areas. And certainly we're seeing more and more of that as the valuation profession evolves. From a tangible assets point of view, you'll all be very familiar with this, but it covers everything from real estate to plant and machinery, arts and antiques, land. Some of you may have seen in our e-news that we put out on a monthly basis for free, land valuation, a paper that was put out by the United Nations last month, which heavily references international valuation standards. Things like that demonstrate the profile of the standards that you're using, which are going to be incorporated into your new approach. Intangible and business, so this covers everything from goodwill to brands, intellectual property, social value, non-financial liabilities, that sort of thing. And financial instruments, is a relatively new area for us. So we only put in place a board for this a couple of years ago. We do have a very basic standard for this, but essentially it is it's going to be replaced next year by a much more advanced standard based on the specialism of the individuals that we have involved in that. And it covers everything from derivatives. There's some crossover with real estate, actually, because you get things like real estate investment trusts, which are obviously important to us. The way that some of you will have seen this, but the way that we approach standards are that we have a common approach to everything. So we've got valuation principles that will apply to all areas. So whether that's business valuation, a real estate valuation, whatever it is, there are certain valuation principles that are very important and they apply to everything. And then what we do is that we have chapters on specialist areas. So that might be plant and machinery, it might be real estate, and essentially you use the chapters that are relevant to the part that to the valuation that you're doing in order to understand the approach to that, along with the common valuation principles. The structure of IVSC, we have a board of trustees, and that provides independent oversight of the IVSC, because most of them are not valuers. And the reason they're not valuers is because it's important that we can demonstrate our independence. And that's what gives us credibility with governments, it gives us credibility with regulators, gives us credibility with a variety of stakeholders. And that's important not just for us, but also for you as practitioners. The boards that we have, and you can see the technical boards that are down there as well, they're populated by people from around the world. So if you believe that you're a leader in the profession and you believe that you have better ideas than what's in the standard, then please, when we have opportunities that come up, which are flagged through our e-news, through our LinkedIn profile, through our website, then feel free to apply to be on one of these boards. Because whilst it's a competitive process to get on one, we want to take the best ideas from wherever they are in the world to incorporate into the standards. Now, one of the challenges is obviously it's important to be able to collaborate and convince others around the world that your idea might be better than theirs, and how do we incorporate that into the standards. But for us, it's really important because the international valuation standards are something that belong to all of us as a valuation profession. They're not IVSC's, they're yours. And so we want to make them as good as possible and keep evolving them. So obviously there are topics which are becoming more and more important, such as ESG is something that we hear a lot about from different investors. So I speak to some of the largest pension funds and sovereign wealth funds in the world, by way of example, and they really want to see that quality and consistency across border. And that can only come from the standards and the professionalism, high quality professionalism being in place in each country. And as part of that, we need to tackle these topics, such as ESG and the impact that that can have on valuations. And we need to make sure we're at the forefront of those discussions. What's the relevance to you as a practitioner? So we regard there being a partnership between IVSC and ISK, and that this enables the following, so global best practice as well as regional best practice. What's really important is that there's a professional body that can take the global principles, the global standards, and educate on those and how to use them, but also has a really good understanding of the local environment. Because there are probably, for example, there's probably legislation in Kenya that might be different to other countries. And it's obviously really important to have that local knowledge. And so that's something for us that is very, very important. If you want to work or live in different countries, actually having an international approach embedded in the way that you're qualified, in your membership of ISK, that should actually make it easier for you if you want to work or live in different countries. Because what it means is that you don't just have a skill set that is relevant to Kenya. It means that you've got a skill set that is actually applicable and relevant to a lot of the world that's out there. One of the areas where countries essentially compete is about getting investment. And the higher the level of transparency and confidence that can be given to investors, whether that's international or domestic that are considering local or international investments, there tends to be a correlation between that and countries achieving high levels of investment. And so it also makes your skills more relevant to organizations looking at different countries they might want to invest in. Touching on one of the areas that your president was talking about earlier, we would say it also helps protect your work, because if you're challenged, and valuers do get challenged, as we know from time to time, particularly it seems following a crisis where people are looking for others to blame. Actually, if you can say, well, I followed this approach, that's something that we find gives credibility, and it can help provide a degree of protection to your work if you've followed the standards effectively. And as part of ISK, which is part of IVSC, you share in a global network, which shares best practice. There's the ability to stay up to date with leading trends and evolving thought leadership. We issue things like perspectives papers on a regular basis, which explore and stimulate discussion in new valuation topics. And you're welcome to all of that kind of information. And for me, when I think about this, yes, international standards are important, but we really, really need to have professionalism there as well. So professionalism is more important than ever. So some people say we live in a post-truth world. Some people out there talk about fake news. But actually, what investors want to see, they want to have confidence. They want to be able to have a professional tell them the truth, actually be able to advise them as to what a valuation of a particular asset is, to inform their decisions. And when I look and interact with younger generations today, what I find is a common theme, which is that they're looking for a meaningful career. And actually being able to contribute, being able to make the financial system better, being able to help others through the advice that is given, something that's a very meaningful career. And so I strongly believe that professionalism is more important than ever, and is particularly important to the new generation that is coming through. We've obviously all been through a difficult time. COVID has affected the world in a way that nothing else has, potentially for a century or more, since the Spanish flu or whatever it was in 1918. And this has had profound impacts in all countries around the world. And it's also led to financial crises, essentially, and a high degree of uncertainty. And so actually, when you think about how we emerge from that, and it'll probably take a year, 2 years, 3 years for us to emerge from what's a health crisis that's become a financial crisis. What we need is people out there that can give confidence to investors where there's a huge degree of uncertainty. And so from my point of view, what you're doing as professionals is hugely, hugely important to restore confidence in economies around the world. And I don't think, certainly in my lifetime, the role of a valuer has never been more important. So please keep up the professionalism and the great work that you're doing. And thank you very much for your time. I hope next time we do one of these, we'll be in a world where we can actually all do this in person. Thank you.